The gunshot split the desert air like thunder, and Catherine Grayson felt her heart slam against her ribs as the stagecoach lurched to a violent stop, throwing her forward against the wooden seat. Dust billowed through the windows in choking clouds, and she heard the driver's curse cut short by another crack of gunfire. She pressed herself against the bench, her traveling dress already soaked with perspiration from the Arizona heat, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the seat. Through the window, she could see 4 riders circling the coach like wolves, their faces covered with bandanas, rifles glinting in the merciless June sun of 1882. "Everyone out!" The command came harsh and final. "Now, unless you want to meet your maker today." Catherine's throat constricted. She was the only passenger on this run from Phoenix to Florence, a fact that had seemed convenient this morning, but now felt terrifyingly isolating. She had been traveling to meet her uncle, who had promised her work as a schoolteacher in the growing mining town. At 23, she had left St. Louis determined to build a new life, away from the suffocating expectations of her mother's society friends and the memory of a failed engagement to a banker's son who had proven himself more interested in her modest inheritance than in her. I said out! The door was yanked open, and rough hands grabbed her arm, hauling her into the blinding sunlight. Catherine stumbled, catching herself before she fell. The heat hit her like a physical force, the temperature easily over 100 degrees. 4 bandits surrounded the coach, and she could see the driver slumped in his seat, a bloom of red spreading across his shoulder. The guard beside him had his hands raised, his shotgun already confiscated. "The strong box," one of the bandits growled, a tall man with cold gray eyes visible above his bandana. He seemed to be the leader. "Get it down." "There ain't much in it," the wounded driver gasped. "Mining payroll does not come through until next week." "We will see about that." The leader gestured with his pistol, and 2 of his men climbed up to wrestle the iron strongbox from beneath the driver's seat. Catherine stood frozen in the road, the sun beating down on her dark hair, sweat trickling down her spine. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, saguaro cacti standing like sentinels against the pale sky, mountains rising purple in the distance. The road to Florence cut through this wasteland like a scar, and there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. "Well, what do we have here?" One of the bandits, shorter than the others with a nervous energy in his movements, had noticed her. He moved closer, and Catherine could smell whiskey and stale tobacco. "Pretty little thing. Maybe we got more than gold today, boys." Fear spiked through her, sharp and cold despite the heat. She took a step back, but he grabbed her wrist. "Let me go," she said, surprised her voice came out steady. "Now why would I do that? We got time before we need to ride out. Might as well have some fun." The leader looked over from where his men were breaking open the strongbox. "Leave her, Jack. We came for gold, not trouble." "Since when is a woman trouble?" Jack laughed, his grip tightening. "Come on, boss, look at her. We could take her with us, keep her around for a while." Catherine's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She tried to pull away, but Jack yanked her closer, his other hand reaching for her face. In that moment, as terror crystallized into something sharp and clear, she heard the sound that would change everything. Hoofbeats, fast and getting closer. The bandits heard it too. They spun toward the sound, weapons rising, and Catherine saw him. A rider on a massive roan horse, coming from the rocky hills to the north at a full gallop, moving with a speed and purpose that seemed to make the very air part before him. Even from a distance, she could see he was enormous, broad-shouldered and powerful, his long dark hair streaming behind him. "Rider!" one of the bandits shouted. The leader cursed. "Just one? Shoot him!" But the rider was not slowing. He leaned low over his horse's neck, and Catherine saw sunlight flash on metal. A rifle. He fired once, and the bandit holding her wrist jerked and released her, crying out as his gun spun from his hand. The rider fired again, and one of the men by the strongbox dove for cover. In the chaos, with the bandit's attention riveted on this new threat, the rider did something Catherine's mind struggled to comprehend. He rode straight at her, not slowing, and as he passed, he leaned down with one muscular arm extended. Time seemed to slow. She saw his face for the first time, angular and weathered, with intense dark eyes and a thick beard, and then his arm locked around her waist and the world tilted. Catherine gasped as he lifted her clean off the ground, swinging her up with seemingly effortless strength. She clutched at him, at his buckskin jacket and his iron-hard arm, and then she was in front of him on the saddle, his body solid and warm behind her, and the horse was wheeling around. "Hold on!" His voice was a deep rumble against her back. More gunshots cracked out, but the rider was already spurring his horse back toward the hills, moving with the same breakneck speed. Catherine clung to the saddle horn with both hands, feeling his arm locked around her middle, holding her secure as the horse's powerful strides ate up the ground. The wind tore at her hair, pulling pins loose, and she could not breathe, could not think, could only hold on as the desert blurred past. Behind them, she heard shouting, more shots, but the sounds grew fainter. The rider guided his horse off the road and into the rough terrain, between towering saguaros and over rocky ground that would have seemed impossible to navigate at such speed. But the horse moved with confidence, and the man behind her rode with absolute control, his body moving with the animal's rhythm. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, the horse's pace never flagging, until they reached a narrow canyon that cut into the mountains. The rider guided them into the shade of the rock walls, finally slowing to a canter, then a walk. Catherine could hear the horse's heavy breathing, could feel the rider's chest rising and falling against her back. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentler than she expected from someone who had just staged such a dramatic rescue. Catherine tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She shook her head. "Can you ride further? We need to put more distance between us and them before we stop." She nodded this time, not trusting her voice. Her whole body was shaking now, the terror of the attack and the shock of the rescue catching up with her. The rider urged his horse deeper into the canyon, following a path that seemed invisible to Catherine's eyes, but that he navigated with confidence. The rock walls rose on either side, striped with bands of red and orange and cream, and the temperature dropped slightly in the shade. The canyon twisted and turned, growing narrower, until they reached a place where a spring bubbled from the rocks, creating a small pool surrounded by green vegetation that seemed miraculous in this harsh landscape. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, then reached up for her. Catherine looked down at him, really seeing him for the first time. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they strained his buckskin jacket. His arms were thick with muscle, visible where his sleeves were rolled back, and his hands, reaching for her waist, were large and calloused. His face was deeply tanned, with strong features and dark eyes that watched her with unexpected gentleness. His hair fell past his shoulders, nearly black, with a few leather cords worked through it. He looked like something from one of the dime novels her friends in St. Louis had giggled over, except real and solid and standing right in front of her. "Come on," he said, "I've got you." Catherine placed her hands on his shoulders and let him lift her down. His strength was evident in the ease with which he handled her weight, setting her gently on the ground. Her legs nearly buckled, and his hands steadied her. "Easy now. You are safe." She looked up at him, this stranger who had appeared like something from a fever dream, and snatched her from what would have surely been a nightmare. "Who are you?" "Name is Dalton Irving. I've got a camp not far from here." He studied her face, and she saw concern in his expression. "You need water. When did you last drink?" "This morning, at the way station." Her voice came out raspy. Dalton moved to his horse, reaching into a saddlebag and producing a canteen. He uncorked it and handed it to her. "Drink. Not too fast." The water was warm, but tasted like salvation. Catherine forced herself to take small sips, though she wanted to gulp it down. Her hands were still shaking. "Thank you," she managed. "You saved my life." "Maybe." Dalton's expression was serious. "Those bandits have been working this territory for months. They usually just take the gold and ride on, but Jack Cordell, the one who grabbed you, he has got a reputation. You were right to be scared." The confirmation of her fear made Catherine's knees weak again. She sat down abruptly on a flat rock near the spring, her traveling dress dusty and torn at the hem. "The driver, he was shot. Shoulder wound. He will probably make it if his partner gets him to Florence quick enough." Dalton knelt to let his horse drink from the pool. "That guard will hightail it to town soon as he figures the bandits are gone. They will come looking for you." "Looking for me?" "Sure. As far as anyone knows, you were taken by bandits or killed in the desert." His dark eyes met hers. "Unless we get you to Florence and let folks know you are alive." Catherine processed this, her mind still struggling to catch up with everything that had happened. "Why did you help me? You could have been killed." Dalton was quiet for a moment, checking his horse's legs and hooves with practiced efficiency. When he spoke, his voice was measured. "I was hunting up in those hills. Saw the coach stop and the bandits circling. Saw them pull you out." He straightened, looking at her directly. "I have seen what men like that do when they take a woman. I was not going to let that happen if I could stop it." The simple statement, delivered without bravado or expectation of thanks, made something in Catherine's chest tighten. In St. Louis, men performed gallantry with an audience in mind, with calculation. This man had ridden into gunfire for a stranger and seemed to think it was just what anyone should do. "Well, I am grateful," she said quietly. "More than I can express." He nodded once, acknowledging her words, but not dwelling on them. "We should rest here for a bit, let the horse recover, then head toward Florence. It is about 15 miles, but we will need to go careful. Those bandits might still be hunting around, and the desert is not forgiving, especially in summer." "Do you live out here?" Catherine looked around at the wild landscape. "In the mountains?" "Most of the time. I've got a cabin about 10 miles north of here, up in higher country where it is cooler. I trap, hunt, sometimes do some scouting work for the army." He pulled a strip of dried meat from his saddlebag and offered it to her. "Not much, but it will help." Catherine took it, surprised by her hunger. She had not eaten since dawn. As she chewed the tough, salty meat, she watched Dalton move around the small oasis with the confidence of someone completely at home in this harsh environment. He refilled his canteen, checked his rifle, scanned the canyon walls with the alertness of a wild animal. Everything about him spoke of competence and strength, so different from the soft-handed men she had known in Missouri. "What were you doing on that stage?" Dalton asked, settling onto a rock across from her, his long legs stretched out. "You do not look like you belong in Arizona." "I'm supposed to be a teacher in Florence. My uncle arranged the position." Catherine pushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "I came from St. Louis." "Long way from home?" It was not home anymore, not really. The words came out before she could stop them, and she saw Dalton's expression shift, becoming more attentive. She rushed to change the subject. "Do you live alone out here?" "Mostly. Suits me." He took a drink from his own canteen. "The wilderness does not lie to you or disappoint you. It is just what it is." Catherine heard the weight behind those words, the suggestion of his own story, his own reasons for choosing solitude. "Have you been in Arizona long?" 5 years. Came out from Colorado after the war. Not the big war," he added, seeing her expression. "A different kind of fighting. Lost my family to a fever that went through our town. Decided there was nothing keeping me there anymore." "I am sorry." The simple words felt inadequate, but Dalton nodded, accepting them. "It was a long time ago. I was younger, angrier. The mountains helped with that. They have got a way of putting things in perspective." He stood, rolling his shoulders. "We should move soon. I want to get you to Florence before dark if we can manage it." "What about you? Will not people ask questions about how you found me?" "Let them ask. The truth is simple enough. I will tell the sheriff what happened, and he can go after those bandits if he has got the men for it, which he probably does not." Dalton's expression darkened. "The law is stretched thin out here. Too much territory, too few good men wearing badges." He helped Catherine to her feet, and she was acutely aware of the warmth of his hand, the gentleness with which he treated her despite his obvious physical power. She was not a small woman, stood 5'6" in her stockings, but she felt delicate next to him. "I'm going to put you back on the horse," he said. "We will ride together like before. Is that all right?" Catherine nodded, a flush creeping up her neck that had nothing to do with the heat. Dalton lifted her onto the saddle with the same effortless strength as before, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist again, secure and protective, and Catherine felt her heart skip in a way that was entirely different from the fear that had gripped it earlier. They rode out of the canyon and into the open desert, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon. Dalton kept them at a steady pace, not pushing the horse, but maintaining good time. He navigated the landscape with complete confidence, occasionally pointing out landmarks, a distinctively shaped rock formation, a distant peak, explaining how to find water and direction in this seemingly featureless expanse. "You know this land well," Catherine observed, relaxing slightly against him as the miles passed. "Have to. It will kill you if you do not respect it." His voice rumbled against her back. "But it is beautiful too in its way. The sunsets, the way the storms roll in during monsoon season, the smell of creosote after rain, there's nothing quite like it." Catherine looked at the landscape with new eyes, trying to see what he saw. The desert had seemed hostile and barren when she first arrived in Arizona, so different from the green of Missouri. But listening to Dalton speak, feeling his appreciation for this harsh land, she began to notice things she had missed. The incredible variety of the cacti, some tall and columnar, others low and spreading. The way the light turned everything golden as the sun dropped lower, the distant purple of the mountains, layer upon layer, fading into the sky. "Do you ever miss Colorado?" she asked. "Sometimes. The high country is different, colder, more trees. But Arizona has become home." He shifted slightly behind her, adjusting his hold. "What about you? Do you miss St. Louis?" "No." The answer came quickly, surprising her with its certainty. "I thought I would, but I do not. I feel like I've been holding my breath for years, and leaving finally let me breathe," she felt rather than saw Dalton's nod of understanding. "I know that feeling." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Catherine found herself hyper-aware of every point of contact between them. His arm around her waist, solid and strong. His chest against her back, rising and falling with his breath. His thighs bracketing hers, moving with the rhythm of the horse. She had never been this close to a man, not even her former fiancé, and she was shocked by how right it felt, how safe. The sun was touching the horizon when they spotted Florence in the distance, a collection of buildings huddled near the Gila River, looking small and fragile against the vast landscape. Dalton guided them toward the town, and Catherine felt a confusing mix of relief and disappointment. Relief that they had made it safely. Disappointment that this strange, intense journey with this remarkable man was ending. As they rode down the main street, heads turned. People stared at the huge mountain man and the dusty, disheveled woman sitting in front of him. Dalton ignored the attention, riding directly to the sheriff's office and dismounting, then lifting Catherine down. The sheriff, a grizzled man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard and a star pinned to his vest, emerged from the building, his hand resting on his pistol. "Dalton Irving, what brings you to town?" "Stage robbery, about 20 miles north on the Phoenix Road. Driver was shot, strongbox taken. 4 bandits led by that gang that has been working the territory." Dalton kept his explanation brief and factual. "They were planning to take this woman. I got her out before they could." The sheriff's eyes widened as he looked at Catherine. "You are Catherine Grayson? Thomas Grayson's niece?" "Yes." Catherine's voice came out small. "Is my uncle here?" "He rode out with a posse this afternoon when the stage guard made it to town and reported the robbery. Said you were missing, possibly dead." The sheriff stepped closer, his expression shifting from suspicion to concern. "Are you hurt, miss?" "No, thanks to Mr. Irving. He saved my life." The sheriff looked between them, clearly trying to piece together the story. "You were there during the robbery, Dalton?" "Hunting in the hills, saw it happening and intervened." Dalton's tone made it clear he was not interested in elaborating. "The guard? He got the driver to town?" "Yes, Doc is working on him now. Looks like he will pull through." The sheriff scratched his beard. "Those bandits get away?" "For now, but they will be back. They always come back." Dalton's jaw tightened. "Jack Cordell was one of them. You need to do something about that gang before someone else gets hurt." "Easier said than done. We have got limited resources and they know this territory as well as anyone." The sheriff sighed, then turned his attention back to Catherine. "Miss Grayson, let me get you to the hotel. Your uncle will be mighty relieved to know you are safe." Catherine nodded but found herself looking at Dalton, not wanting to leave him, not wanting this to be goodbye. "Thank you," she said again, the words feeling desperately inadequate. "I owe you everything." Dalton's dark eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a connection that made Catherine's breath catch. "You owe me nothing. I'm glad you are safe. Will you stay in town, at least for tonight?" The question came out more pleading than she intended. I should get back. My horse needs rest, and I have got supplies to gather before heading back up to my cabin. But he hesitated, and Catherine saw the conflict in his expression. Please. She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. I would like to thank you properly. Let me buy you dinner at least. The sheriff cleared his throat. Town would like to hear the full story, Dalton, and it's getting dark. You could head out at first light. Dalton looked between them, then nodded slowly. All right. First light? Relief flooded through Catherine, surprising her with its intensity. She had known this man for only a few hours, but the thought of him disappearing into the mountains, possibly forever, felt unbearable. The sheriff arranged for Catherine to have a room at the Florence Hotel, a modest 2-story building on Main Street, and sent word to the posse about her safe return. Catherine was shown to a small but clean room, where she was finally able to wash her face and hands, shake the dust from her dress, and attempt to fix her hair. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her face was sunburned, her hair wild, her eyes bright with something that looked like fever but felt like life. There was a knock at the door. Catherine opened it to find a stout woman in her 40s with kind eyes. Miss Grayson? I am Martha Wells. I run the hotel. Your uncle just rode in. He's downstairs asking for you. Catherine followed her down to the small lobby, where a tall, thin man with gray hair and spectacles was pacing anxiously. When he saw her, his face transformed with relief. Catherine, thank God! He rushed forward, taking her hands. When Elijah, the stage guard, said the bandits had taken you, I feared the worst. I am fine, Uncle Thomas. A man named Dalton Irving rescued me before they could take me away. Catherine squeezed his hands, seeing genuine concern in his face. Her uncle, her mother's brother, had always been kind to her during his infrequent visits to St. Louis. He brought me here safely. Dalton Irving? The mountain man? Thomas's eyebrows rose. I have heard of him. Keeps to himself, but folks say he is reliable. You were fortunate he was there. More than fortunate. Catherine thought of those terrifying moments when Jack Cordell had grabbed her, what might have happened if Dalton had not appeared. He was extraordinarily brave. We should thank him properly. Is he still in town? He is staying until morning. I invited him to dinner. I hope that is acceptable? Thomas smiled. Of course. Let me arrange something at the restaurant. You have been through an ordeal, Catherine. I am so very glad you are safe. Dinner was arranged at the town's best restaurant, which was still quite modest by St. Louis standards, but clean and welcoming. Dalton arrived as the sun set, having stabled his horse and apparently made some effort to clean up, though he still looked distinctly out of place in the civilized setting, too large and wild for the small dining room. Catherine felt her heart skip when he walked in, his dark eyes scanning the room until they found her. He had brushed his long hair back and changed into a clean shirt, though he still wore his buckskin pants and boots. The effect was striking, this powerful man making a visible effort for her sake. Thomas stood and extended his hand. Mr. Irving, I am Thomas Grayson, Catherine's uncle. I cannot adequately express my gratitude for what you did today. Dalton shook his hand, his large hand engulfing Thomas's slender one. Your niece has already thanked me, sir. It is not necessary. Nevertheless, please join us. Order whatever you like. It is the least we can do. They sat, and Catherine found herself across from Dalton, hyper-aware of his presence, the way his broad shoulders strained his shirt, the strength in his hands as he handled the menu. When their eyes met, she felt that same electric connection from earlier, like something pulling tight between them. The meal was simple but good. Beef and potatoes and fresh bread, and Catherine watched Dalton eat with the appetite of a man who spent his days in hard physical labor. Thomas asked questions about the robbery, and Dalton answered patiently, filling in details that painted a clearer picture of what had happened. Catherine added her own perspective, and Thomas grew increasingly grave. Those bandits are becoming bolder, Thomas said, his food forgotten. The mining operations bring more money through this area, which draws criminals. We need better protection. You need more law, Dalton said bluntly. One sheriff and a few deputies cannot cover this much territory. The bandits know that. There is talk of bringing in federal marshals, but these things move slowly. Thomas sighed. In the meantime, we do the best we can. After dinner, Thomas excused himself, claiming exhaustion from the day's events but giving Catherine a knowing look that made her blush. She walked outside with Dalton into the cooling evening air. The stars were beginning to appear, brilliant in the clear desert sky. "I have never seen so many stars," Catherine said, tilting her head back. "In St. Louis there are too many lights. One of the things I love about living in the wilderness, the sky goes on forever." Dalton stood beside her, his presence solid and comforting. "You really are not hurt? No injuries I should know about?" "Just some bruises, nothing serious." Catherine looked up at him, at his profile in the starlight. "Thanks to you. You have thanked me enough." But his voice was gentle. "What will you do now? Still planning to teach?" "Yes. The school here needs a teacher, and I need the work. I want to make a life here." She hesitated, then added, "I want to be someone different from who I was in St. Louis. Someone stronger." "You are already strong. You did not panic today, did not fall apart. Plenty of people would have." Dalton turned to face her fully. "You will do fine here, Miss Grayson." "Catherine. Please call me Catherine." "Catherine." The way he said her name, soft and deliberate, made her shiver despite the lingering heat. "You should rest. You have had a long day." "Will I see you again, before you leave?" The question came out more desperate than she intended. Dalton was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine could see him weighing his answer. "I do not come to town often. My life is in the mountains. But you do come sometimes." She stepped closer to him, close enough to catch his scent, leather and horse and something clean like pine. "I would like to see you again, Dalton, to thank you properly, once I'm settled." "Catherine." Her name came out almost as a warning, but she saw something in his eyes, heat and longing that matched what she felt. "You do not want to get involved with someone like me. I am not a civilized man. I live rough, and I like it that way. I do not care about that." The words came from somewhere deep inside her, some true place she had not known existed, until today. "I know we just met, and this probably sounds crazy, but I feel like something happened today, something more than just you saving my life. Did not you feel it too?" The silence stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Dalton reached out, his large hand cupping her cheek with unexpected gentleness. "I felt it. From the moment I saw you standing there in the road, I felt it. But that does not mean acting on it is smart. Since when do we only do smart things?" Catherine leaned into his touch, her heart hammering. "You rode into gunfire today. That was not smart either." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less careworn. "You have got a point there. So you will come see me, after I'm settled in?" She covered his hand with hers, holding it against her face. "Please, Dalton, I need to see you again." He was quiet for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "Give me 2 weeks. I need to check my trap lines, restock my cabin. Then I will come back to Florence. We can talk more then. Figure out if this is real or just the aftermath of danger." "It is real," Catherine said it with absolute certainty. "I have never been more sure of anything." Dalton's thumb brushed her cheek, a feather-light touch that sent sparks through her. 2 weeks, Catherine. If you still feel this way in 2 weeks, we will talk." "I will feel the same way." He leaned down, and for a moment Catherine thought he might kiss her, wanted it with an intensity that shocked her. But instead, he pressed his lips to her forehead, a gesture that was somehow more intimate than a kiss would have been. "Get some rest. Tomorrow you start your new life." Then he was gone, walking away into the darkness with that easy, confident stride, leaving Catherine standing in the starlight with her hand pressed to where his lips had touched, her heart full of something that felt like hope and promise, and the beginning of everything she had never known she wanted. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Catherine moved into the small house behind the schoolhouse, a simple 2-room structure that came with the teaching position. She met her students, a mix of miners' children and local ranch kids, ranging in age from 6 to 14. The school itself was a single large room with benches and a pot-bellied stove, basic but serviceable. Uncle Thomas helped her get settled, introducing her to the important people in town. Florence was a growing community, fueled by the nearby Silver King mine and the surrounding ranches. The population was diverse: Mexican families who had lived in the area for generations, Anglo newcomers drawn by mining opportunities, Chinese workers who had come to build the railroads and stayed. Catherine threw herself into her work, preparing lessons, learning her students' names and abilities, trying to keep her mind off the calendar. But every night, she counted the days until Dalton's promised return. She told herself she was being foolish, that he might not come, that even if he did, nothing could come of a relationship between a schoolteacher and a mountain man. They lived in different worlds. Yet every time she closed her eyes, she felt his arm around her waist, his solid presence behind her on the horse, the gentleness of his touch on her face. Martha Wells, the hotel owner, became a friend. She was a widow who had come to Arizona with her late husband during the silver rush and stayed after he died in a mining accident. Over tea one afternoon in Catherine's new home, she gave Catherine a knowing look. "So when is that mountain man coming back?" Catherine nearly choked on her tea. "I am sorry?" "Dalton Irving. The whole town saw how you two looked at each other that night, and you have been watching the road every day since he left." Martha's smile was kind. "I'm not judging, dear. Just curious." "He said he would come back in 2 weeks." Catherine set down her cup, her hands trembling slightly. "It has been 13 days. And you are worried he will not come?" "Yes." "No, I do not know." Catherine stood and paced to the window. "This is insane, Martha. I do not know him. We spent a few hours together. What am I doing?" "You're feeling something real, maybe for the first time in your life." Martha's voice was gentle. "I saw my husband 3 times before I knew I would marry him. Sometimes you just know. But even if he comes, what then? His life is in the mountains. Mine is here, teaching. How could we make that work?" "Life has a way of figuring itself out if you let it. Do not borrow trouble, Catherine. Wait and see what happens." On the 14th day, Catherine was teaching her students about geography, using a map she had drawn on the board when one of the boys, a 10-year-old named Samuel, suddenly pointed out the window. "Miss Grayson, there is a giant on a horse out there." Catherine's heart stopped. She turned to look, and there he was, Dalton Irving, sitting tall on his roan horse in the street outside the school, looking even larger than she remembered, his long hair moving in the breeze. "Children, you are dismissed early today. Please finish your reading assignment at home." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The students erupted in excited chatter, gathering their things and rushing out, several of them gawking openly at Dalton as they passed. Catherine watched from the doorway as they scattered. Then Dalton dismounted and walked toward her, and she realized she was trembling. "Hello, Catherine." His voice was exactly as she remembered, that deep rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. "You came." It was all she could manage. "I said I would." He stopped a few feet from her, and she could see tension in his posture, as if he too had been wondering about this moment. "Have you changed your mind?" "No." Catherine stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "Have you?" "No. I tried. Spent 2 weeks telling myself this was a bad idea, that we barely know each other, that our lives do not fit together." His dark eyes searched her face. "None of it worked. I kept thinking about you, about how you felt in my arms, about the way you looked at me that night. I thought about you too. Constantly." Catherine reached out tentatively, placing her hand on his chest, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt, the steady beat of his heart. "I was afraid you would not come. I made you a promise." Dalton covered her hand with his much larger one. "Can you take a walk with me? There is something I want to show you." Catherine nodded, stepping back inside only long enough to grab her bonnet and lock the schoolhouse door. Dalton led his horse as they walked, heading out of town toward the river. The Gila flowed year-round here, lined with cottonwoods that provided precious shade. They walked in silence at first, the tension between them both exciting and terrifying. Finally, they reached a spot where the river bent, creating a small beach of sand and smooth stones. Dalton tied his horse to a tree and turned to face her. "I need to be honest with you about who I am," he said. "You deserve to know what you would be getting into if we pursue this." "All right." Catherine sat on a fallen log, and Dalton settled beside her, his weight making the log creak. I told you I lost my family to fever. What I did not tell you is that before that I was married. I was 22, she was 19. Sarah. His voice grew distant. We had been married less than a year when the fever came. She died in my arms, and there was nothing I could do. My parents went 2 days later, then my younger sister. Dalton. Catherine took his hand, squeezing it. I buried them all, then I left. Just walked away from everything I had known. Spent a year drifting, drinking too much, getting into fights. Nearly got myself killed a few times, and part of me wanted that. Then I ended up in Colorado, in the high country, and something about those mountains spoke to me. The silence, the solitude. I started to heal. He paused, his jaw tight. But I also built walls. I told myself I would never let myself care about someone like that again, because losing them hurt too much. I have lived alone for 5 years, and it has been fine. I have been content. Until now, Catherine said it softly. Until now. Dalton turned to look at her fully. I do not understand what is happening between us, Catherine. It does not make sense. But from the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. And when I touched you, when I held you on that horse, every wall I had built started to crack. I know. I felt it too. Catherine moved closer to him. I was engaged before, in St. Louis, to a man my mother approved of, who had money and prospects. I thought I loved him, or at least I convinced myself I did. But when I found out he was only interested in my inheritance, small as it was, I felt relieved. Relieved to have an excuse to end it, because I realized I did not love him at all. I had been sleepwalking through my life, doing what was expected, never really feeling anything. She took a breath, gathering her courage. Then you rode out of nowhere and grabbed me, and I felt more alive in those few hours than I had in years. You are not what I thought I wanted. Dalton, you are something I did not even know I could want, but now that I have met you, I cannot imagine wanting anything else. Dalton reached up, cupping her face in both his large hands. I am not good at being civilized. I am not going to be comfortable at church socials or dinner parties. I live rough and wild, and that is not going to change. I do not want you to change. I want you exactly as you are. Catherine placed her hands over his. Can we try, Dalton? Can we see if this works? I live 10 miles from town, up in the mountains. You've got your teaching job here. How would that work? We figure it out. Maybe you come to town more often. Maybe I come to visit you on weekends when there's no school. Maybe eventually we find a way to live together. But we try. She leaned forward, her forehead touching his. Please, Dalton. I do not want to wonder what might have been. He was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine could feel the tension in his body, the war between his instinct for self-protection and his desire for connection. Then he closed the remaining distance between them and kissed her. It was like nothing Catherine had ever experienced. Her fiancé's kisses had been perfunctory, polite. This was fire and need and homecoming all at once. Dalton's lips were firm and warm, his beard rough against her skin, and when she gasped, he deepened the kiss, one hand sliding into her hair while the other wrapped around her waist, pulling her against him. Catherine melted into him, her hands gripping his shoulders, feeling the hard muscle, the strength that had saved her life and was now holding her with such care. She had not known a kiss could be like this, could make her feel like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dalton rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. I'm going to try, Catherine. I cannot promise it will be easy, and I cannot promise I will be good at it, but I'm going to try. That is all I ask. Catherine kissed him again, softer this time, savoring it. We will figure out the rest together. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the river, talking. Dalton told her about his cabin, how he had built it himself in a meadow surrounded by pine trees, with a spring nearby and a view of the valley below. He talked about his life in the mountains, the cycles of hunting and trapping, the hard work and solitude. Catherine told him about her childhood in St. Louis, her love of books and teaching, her frustration with the narrow expectations placed on women in society. "I want to matter," she said at one point. "I want to do something that makes a difference. That is why I became a teacher. These children in Florence, they need education. They need someone who believes in them. Some of them come from families that barely speak English. Others have parents who never learned to read. I can help them." "You will?" Dalton looked at her with something like awe. "You've got strength in you, Catherine. I saw it that day with the bandits. You were terrified, but you did not break. You are stronger than you know." The words meant more coming from him than they would have from anyone else. This man who lived by his strength and skills, who survived in one of the harshest environments in the country, saw strength in her. It made Catherine feel like she could do anything. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Dalton walked Catherine back to town. At her door, he kissed her again, slowly and thoroughly, until her knees were weak. "I will come back in a week," he said. "I need to check my trap lines and take care of some things at my cabin. But then I will come back, and we can spend more time together. Is a week too long?" "A week is forever, but I will survive." Catherine smiled up at him. "Be safe, Dalton." "You too. If you need anything, you tell the sheriff. He knows how to reach me in an emergency." Dalton's expression grew serious. "Those bandits are still out there. Be careful." "I will. I promise." She watched him ride away, sitting tall on his horse, until he disappeared into the twilight. Then she went inside and sat on her narrow bed, touching her lips, still feeling the pressure of his kiss, and allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found something extraordinary. The next week passed more slowly than any week of Catherine's life. She taught her students, prepared lessons, attended a town meeting about funding for school supplies. But underneath everything, she counted the hours until Dalton's return. Uncle Thomas noticed her distraction. "You are thinking about him," he said one evening when he came to dinner at her little house. "Is it that obvious?" Catherine focused on serving the stew she had made. "Only to anyone with eyes." Thomas smiled gently. "Are you sure about this, Catherine? Dalton Irving is a good man by all accounts, but he's not the sort of man I imagined you would choose." "He's not the sort of man I imagined either," Catherine admitted. "But imagining is not the same as feeling. And what I feel with him is real, Uncle Thomas. More real than anything I felt in St. Louis. Your mother is going to have strong opinions about this." "My mother has strong opinions about everything, and since I'm a grown woman with my own life, I get to make my own choices." Catherine said it firmly, surprising herself with her certainty. Thomas laughed. "She's not going to like that answer. She does not have to. I love her, but I'm not living my life for her approval anymore." Catherine sat across from her uncle. "I am happy here, Uncle Thomas, happier than I have been in a long time. The teaching is hard work, but it is rewarding. The town is rough, but it is real. And Dalton, he makes me feel like I am finally awake after years of sleeping." "Then I am happy for you." Thomas reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Just be careful. The heart is a powerful thing, but it can also be foolish." "I will be careful, but I am also going to be brave." On the 7th day, Catherine was working in the small garden behind her house, trying to coax vegetables from the stubborn desert soil when she heard hoofbeats. She looked up, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and saw Dalton riding toward her. Her heart leaped, but as he drew closer, she saw something was wrong. His face was grim, his posture tense. He dismounted quickly and strode toward her, and Catherine felt fear spike through her. "What is it? What happened?" "Those bandits. They hit another stage yesterday east of here. This time they killed the driver and took 2 passengers, a man and his wife." Dalton's voice was hard. "The sheriff is forming a posse, and he asked me to track them." Catherine's blood went cold. "Are you going?" "I have to. They are getting bolder, and someone needs to stop them before more people die." He took her hands, his grip tight. "I came to tell you I might be gone longer than planned. Tracking them could take days, maybe a week or more." "It is dangerous." Catherine stated the obvious, seeing the determination in his face. "Yes, but I've tracked dangerous men before. I know what I'm doing." Dalton pulled her closer. "I need you to promise me you will be careful while I'm gone. Stay in town, do not travel alone, and keep your door locked at night." I promise. But Dalton, you have to promise me you will come back. She gripped his shirt, fear making her voice shake. I just found you. I cannot lose you now. I will come back. He kissed her hard, desperately. I promise, Catherine. I will come back to you. Then he was gone, riding toward the sheriff's office to join the posse. Catherine stood in her garden, her hands pressed to her mouth, fighting tears. She had lived her whole life safely, cautiously, never taking risks. Now she had opened her heart to a man who lived on the edge of danger, and she was terrified of what that might cost. The next 10 days were the longest of Catherine's life. News trickled back to Florence, brought by riders who had met the posse. They had tracked the bandits into the mountains, lost the trail, found it again. There had been a confrontation, gunfire exchanged, but no details beyond that. Catherine threw herself into her teaching, working until she was exhausted, but still sleep came hard. Martha Wells checked on her daily, bringing food and company. He will be fine, she said repeatedly. Dalton Irving knows those mountains better than anyone. If anyone can track those bandits, it is him. But what if something happens? What if he is hurt and cannot get back? Catherine paced her small living room, unable to sit still. Then someone will bring word. No news is good news, dear. You have to trust that. On the 11th day, Catherine was working late at the schoolhouse, preparing for the next week's lessons, when she heard the door open. She looked up, expecting to see Uncle Thomas or Martha, and instead saw Dalton standing in the doorway. He looked exhausted, his face drawn, his clothes dusty and stained. But he was alive, he was whole, and he was here. Catherine dropped the papers she was holding and ran to him, throwing herself into his arms. He caught her, holding her tight, his face buried in her hair. You are back. You are safe. She was crying, she realized, tears streaming down her face. I told you I would come back. His voice was rough, tired. We got them, Catherine. All 4 of them. They are in custody, heading to Tucson for trial. Was anyone hurt? 2 of the posse members took minor wounds. The bandits did not surrender easy. Dalton pulled back to look at her face, wiping her tears with his thumbs. But it is over. They will hang for what they did. Catherine kissed him, not caring that he was dirty and exhausted, not caring about anything except that he was here. When they finally pulled apart, she said, You need food and rest. Come on. She took him to her house, heated water so he could wash, and made him eat the stew she had warming on the stove. He sat at her small table, devouring the food with the appetite of someone who had been living on hardtack and dried meat for days. Catherine watched him, feeling something settle in her chest, something that felt like certainty. Stay tonight, she said. You are too tired to ride back to your cabin. Dalton looked at her, understanding the weight of what she was suggesting. For an unmarried woman to have a man stay overnight in her home was scandalous, even in the rough and tumble West. But Catherine did not care about scandal anymore. Catherine, people will talk. Let them talk. I do not want you riding out there exhausted. You can sleep on the floor. I just need to know you are close. She met his eyes. Please. He nodded slowly. All right. But we do this properly. I will bed down out here and you take your room. I'm not going to damage your reputation more than necessary. My reputation can survive a little damage, but Catherine was secretly touched by his concern for her standing in the community. She gave him a blanket and pillow, and he settled on the floor by the stove, his long body barely fitting in the space. Catherine retreated to her bedroom, leaving the door open a crack, and lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sound of his breathing. Just knowing he was there, safe and whole, made her feel more at peace than she had in days. In the morning, Catherine woke to find Dalton already up, the blanket neatly folded, the stove crackling with fresh wood. He was making coffee, moving around her small kitchen with surprising competence. You should not be doing that, she said, coming out in her dressing gown, then blushing at her state of undress. I mean, you are the guest. Guest who is imposing on your hospitality. Dalton poured her a cup of coffee, his eyes warm as they took in her appearance. Besides, I am used to doing for myself. Sit down, I will make breakfast. Catherine sat watching in amazement as this huge mountain man efficiently prepared eggs and bacon on her small stove. The domesticity of the scene was both surreal and deeply right. When he set a plate in front of her, their fingers brushed, and that electric connection sparked between them again. "Thank you for letting me stay," Dalton said, settling across from her with his own plate. "I needed to see you to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine. I was worried about you." Catherine sipped her coffee. "What happens now, with the bandits captured?" "The sheriff will testify at the trial. I will probably have to go to Tucson to testify too, since I was there when we brought them in. But that is weeks away." He looked at her seriously. "Catherine, I have been thinking while I was out tracking. About us. About how to make this work." Her heart skipped. "And? I want to try something. I want to come to Florence every week, spend time with you, get to know you properly. Not just stolen hours, but real time. And I want you to come to my cabin, see where I live, see if you can stand it." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I know it is fast and I know it is not conventional, but I'm too old to play games and life is too short. If this is real, if we are real, I want to know." "Yes," Catherine did not hesitate. "Yes to all of it. You might hate my cabin. It is rough and it is isolated. No neighbors for miles, no shops, no society. I do not need society. I need you." She squeezed his hand. "When can I come see it?" "Next weekend? School will be out and you will have 2 days. I can come get you Saturday morning, bring you back Sunday night." He looked uncertain, as if expecting her to back out. "If you are sure." "I am sure." They spent the rest of the morning together, walking through town, and Catherine felt the eyes on them, the whispers. She knew what people were thinking, that she was rushing into something foolish, that she barely knew this man. But she held her head high and kept her hand in Dalton's, and eventually the whispers faded into the background. Uncle Thomas cornered her that afternoon after Dalton had left. "Catherine, people are talking. They saw him leaving your house this morning." "He slept on the floor. Nothing improper happened." Catherine kept her voice calm. "He was exhausted from tracking those bandits, and I was not going to send him out into the dark." "I believe you, but not everyone will." Thomas sighed. "You need to be careful, my dear. Your reputation matters, especially as a teacher." "I am being careful, but I am also not going to give up something real because of what people might think." Catherine met her uncle's eyes. "I am 23 years old, Uncle Thomas. I am old enough to make my own choices, even if they are unconventional." Thomas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You are right. Just promise me you will be smart about this." "I promise. But I am also going to be happy. For the first time in my life, I am going to choose happiness over propriety." The week dragged until Saturday finally arrived. Catherine was up before dawn, packing a small bag with a change of clothes and trying not to let her nervousness overwhelm her. She was going to spend the night at Dalton's cabin, alone with him in the wilderness. It was reckless and improper, and she did not care. Dalton arrived as the sun was rising, and Catherine met him at her door, her bag already packed. He looked at her with such warmth that her nervousness evaporated. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready?" They rode together on his horse, Catherine sitting in front of him as she had during the rescue, except this time there was no fear, only excitement. Dalton guided them north out of Florence, into the hills, the landscape gradually changing as they gained elevation. The desert gave way to grasslands, then to scattered juniper and pine trees. The air grew cooler and smelled different, clean and resinous. "How much further?" Catherine asked after they had been riding for over an hour. "Another hour. The cabin is at about 5,000 feet, high enough to be cooler in summer, but not so high that winter is impossible." Dalton's arm tightened around her waist. "You tired?" "No, this is beautiful." And it was. The view stretched for miles, layers of mountains fading into the distance, the sky an impossible blue. They rode through a canyon where a creek tumbled over rocks, then up a steep trail that switchbacked through pine forest. Finally, they emerged into a meadow dotted with wildflowers, and Catherine saw the cabin. It was small, built of logs with a stone chimney nestled at the edge of the trees. A corral held 2 horses besides Dalton's roan, and Catherine could see a small barn, a smokehouse, and what looked like a workshop. The meadow stretched in front of the cabin, ending at a cliff edge that overlooked a vast valley below. "This is yours," Catherine breathed. "This is home." Dalton dismounted and lifted her down. "Come on, I will show you." The cabin interior was one large room, simply but solidly built. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a wooden bed frame with furs and blankets stood against another, and a rough-hewn table and chairs occupied the center. Shelves held supplies, tools, and a few books. It was Spartan but clean, and Catherine could see the care that had gone into every detail. "You built this yourself?" She ran her hand over the smooth logs of the wall. "Most of it. A friend helped with the roof and the chimney, but the rest I did alone." Dalton watched her carefully, as if gauging her reaction. "I know it is not much compared to what you are used to." "It is perfect." Catherine turned to face him. "I can feel you in this place, Dalton. Your strength, your skill. It is like the cabin is an extension of you." Something in his expression softened. "You really mean that?" "I do." She walked to the window, looking out at the breathtaking view. "How could anyone not love this?" Dalton came up behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "I was afraid you would hate it, that you would realize you could not imagine living somewhere so remote." Catherine turned in his arms, looking up at him. "Is that what you want? For me to live here with you? Eventually, if this works, if we work." His dark eyes were intense. "I know it is too soon to talk about it, but I cannot stop thinking about it. You here, in this cabin, waking up next to me, sharing this life." "I think about it too." Catherine reached up to touch his face, his beard soft under her fingers. "I think about what it would be like to be yours completely." Dalton's breath caught. "Catherine, show me your life, Dalton. Show me everything." He did. They spent the day exploring the area around the cabin, Dalton showing her the spring that provided his water, the places where he set traps, the trails he used for hunting. He showed her how to read signs in the wilderness, tracks and broken branches, and the behavior of animals. He taught her to identify edible plants and which ones to avoid. And through it all, Catherine felt herself falling deeper in love with this man who moved through the wild with such confidence and grace. They ate dinner by the fire, venison stew that Dalton had prepared, and Catherine marveled at how comfortable she felt here, so far from civilization. As darkness fell, Dalton lit lanterns, and the cabin glowed with warm light. "You should take the bed," Dalton said as the hour grew late. "I will sleep on the floor." "That is ridiculous. It is your bed, and this is your home." Catherine felt her face heat. "Besides, the bed is large enough for both of us. We are both adults." "Catherine, if we share that bed, I'm not sure I can be a gentleman." Dalton's voice was rough. "Then do not be a gentleman." The words came out before she could stop them, bold and reckless. "Dalton, I want you. I have wanted you since the day you saved me. I know it is improper. I know we are not married, but I do not care. I want to be yours." Dalton closed the distance between them in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands. "Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back." "I am sure. I've never been more sure of anything." Catherine rose on her toes, kissing him with all the passion she had been holding back. Dalton groaned against her mouth, his control shattering. He lifted her easily, carrying her to the bed, and laid her down gently on the furs. His hands were shaking as he began to unlace her dress, and Catherine helped him, both of them fumbling with buttons and laces until finally she was bare before him. "You are so beautiful," Dalton breathed, his eyes roaming over her. "Catherine, you are perfect." She reached for him, unbuttoning his shirt with trembling fingers, revealing the muscled expanse of his chest, the scars that marked his life in the wilderness. He was magnificent, all power and strength, and he was looking at her like she was something precious beyond words. What followed was tender and passionate and unlike anything Catherine had imagined. Dalton was gentle despite his size and strength, taking his time, making sure she was ready, whispering words of love and reassurance. There was pain at first, but it faded quickly into pleasure, and Catherine held on to him, feeling like they were becoming one person, bound together by something deeper than just physical connection. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the furs, Catherine's head on Dalton's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. His hand stroked her hair, and she had never felt so safe, so cherished. "I love you," Dalton said into the darkness. "I know it is fast, but I love you, Catherine. You have brought light back into my life." "I love you too." Catherine tilted her head to look at him. I did not know it could be like this, that I could feel this way about someone. Marry me. The words were sudden, fierce. I know we have only known each other a month, and I know I should court you properly, but I do not want to wait. Marry me, Catherine. Be my wife. Joy flooded through her, so intense it was almost painful. Yes. Yes, I will marry you. Dalton kissed her deeply, rolling her beneath him, and they made love again, slower this time, savoring each touch and kiss. Catherine felt transformed, like she had become someone new, someone brave and passionate and fully alive. They spent Sunday morning planning their future. Dalton would come to Florence regularly, and they would marry as soon as arrangements could be made, probably within a month. Catherine would continue teaching for the rest of the school year, then decide if she wanted to keep the position or focus on building their life together. You do not have to give up teaching if you do not want to, Dalton insisted. I know it is important to you. I will see how I feel. Right now, I just want to be with you. Catherine smiled at him across the breakfast table. We will figure it out. The ride back to Florence that afternoon was bittersweet. Catherine did not want to leave the cabin, the magical space where they had become truly bound to each other. But she also felt excitement about the future, about making their plans real. As they neared town, Dalton slowed the horse. People are going to talk, about how fast this is happening. Let them talk. I do not care anymore. Catherine leaned back against him. I am marrying the man I love. That is all that matters. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church in Florence. It was a simple ceremony, attended by Uncle Thomas, Martha Wells, the sheriff and his wife, and a handful of Catherine's students and their parents. Catherine wore a new dress made by the town seamstress, a simple ivory gown that made her feel beautiful. Dalton wore new clothes too, black trousers and a white shirt, though he looked distinctly uncomfortable in the formal attire. But when he saw Catherine walking toward him, his face transformed with such love and awe that she felt tears prick her eyes. Uncle Thomas gave her away, whispering, "Be happy, my dear," as he placed her hand in Dalton's. The ceremony was brief, and when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Dalton kissed her with such tenderness that Catherine forgot anyone else was in the room. Applause brought her back to reality, and she turned to face their small audience, feeling joy radiate through her. There was a modest celebration at the hotel, with cake and punch, and Catherine endured the well-wishes and curious looks with good grace. Some people were clearly skeptical of the hasty marriage, but others seemed genuinely happy for them. Martha hugged Catherine tightly, whispering, "You made the right choice, dear. I can see it in both your faces." As evening fell, Dalton took Catherine's hand. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Irving?" The name sent a thrill through her. "Yes, take me home." They rode through the darkness to Dalton's cabin, now their cabin, and Catherine felt like she was riding toward her real life, the one she was meant to live. When they arrived, Dalton carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the firelight. "Welcome home, Catherine." "I am home," she agreed, pulling him down for a kiss. "Wherever you are, I am home." They spent the rest of the school year traveling between the cabin and Florence, Dalton riding into town with Catherine every Monday morning and coming back for her every Friday evening. It was not ideal, but it worked. Catherine finished out her teaching contract while learning the skills she would need for life in the mountains. Dalton taught her to shoot, to fish, to preserve food, to track animals and read the weather. She proved an apt student, and he told her repeatedly how proud he was of her strength and adaptability. In June, when school let out for the summer, Catherine made the decision to resign her teaching position. She loved the work, but she loved her new life more. Uncle Thomas was disappointed but understanding, especially when Catherine promised to tutor any children in the area who needed help. The summer passed in a golden haze. Golden. Catherine threw herself into making the cabin truly theirs, planting a garden, making curtains for the windows, filling the shelves with preserves she made from berries Dalton helped her gather. They spent long days exploring the mountains together, and Catherine fell more in love with the wild beauty of the land and with her husband. In August, Catherine realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week, then told Dalton, watching his face transform with wonder. "A baby?" He placed his large hand on her still flat stomach. "Are you sure?" As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I think so. Catherine covered his hand with hers. Are you happy? Happy? Dalton pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. Catherine, I am beyond happy. I thought I had lost everything when my first family died, that I would never have this again. But you have given me back the future. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in March of 1883, in the cabin with Martha Wells acting as midwife, having come up from Florence specifically to help, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas after Catherine's uncle, and Dalton cried when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming into his beard as he looked down at the tiny face. "Ha, thank you," he whispered to Catherine, who was exhausted but glowing. "Thank you for this gift." "Thank you for saving me," Catherine replied, meaning more than just the rescue from the bandits. "Thank you for showing me how to really live." Life settled into a rhythm. Thomas was a healthy, happy baby who seemed to take to mountain life from the start. When he was old enough, Dalton would carry him around in a sling, showing him the trees and animals, talking to him constantly. Catherine watched them together and felt her heart might burst from the fullness of it. They made regular trips to Florence, maintaining connections with Uncle Thomas and the few friends they had made. Catherine tutored several children whose families lived in the mountains, traveling to them or having them come to the cabin for lessons. It was not the same as running a schoolhouse, but it was satisfying work, and it fit their life. 2 years later, Catherine gave birth to a daughter whom they named Sarah after Dalton's first wife. Catherine had suggested it, wanting to honor the woman who had been part of making Dalton who he was, and Dalton had held her close and told her she was the most generous person he had ever known. Sarah was red-haired and fierce, nothing like her gentle brother. She kept them both on their toes, and Dalton doted on her shamelessly. Watching him braid his daughter's wild hair or dance around the cabin with her perched on his shoulders, Catherine sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was her life. The years passed, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. There were hard winters when they were snowed in for weeks at a time, summer droughts that tested their water supply, a year when illness swept through Florence and they kept the children away from town out of fear. But through it all, Catherine and Dalton's love deepened, growing roots as strong as the pine trees that surrounded their cabin. On their 10th anniversary, they sat on the porch of their cabin, now expanded to include 2 additional rooms for the children, watching Thomas, now 9, teach 7-year-old Sarah how to track a rabbit through the meadow. The mountains stretched away in all directions, purple in the evening light, and Catherine leaned against Dalton's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up your solitude for this?" Dalton was quiet for a moment, his arm coming around her shoulders. "I thought I wanted to be alone for the rest of my life. I thought that was safer, easier. Then you came along and showed me that I was not living. I was just existing. You gave me back my life, Catherine. You and these children, this family. I thank God every day for those bandits stopping that stage." Catherine laughed softly. "That is probably the first time anyone has thanked God for bandits." "Well, they did bring me to you, even if they did not mean to." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Catherine Irving, more now than I did 10 years ago, and I did not think that was possible." "I love you too, so much it still surprises me sometimes." Catherine watched their children, Thomas patiently pointing out signs in the dirt to his eager sister. "We have made something beautiful here, have not we? A real family, a real life. The best life I could have imagined." Dalton stood, pulling her to her feet. "Come on, let me show you something." He led her around the cabin to a spot where he had been working on a project for weeks, refusing to let her see it. Catherine gasped when she saw what he had built, a wooden bench positioned at the edge of the meadow where the view stretched for miles, with their names carved into the backrest along with the date of their wedding. "For you," Dalton said, "for us, so we can sit here when we are old and gray and watch the sunset together." Catherine traced the carved letters with her fingers, her eyes blurring with tears. "It is perfect. You are perfect. Not perfect, just yours." He settled onto the bench and pulled her down beside him. "Always yours, Catherine." They sat together as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Catherine thought about the long, strange journey that had brought her here. If someone had told her 10 years ago that she would end up married to a mountain man, living in a cabin miles from civilization with 2 children and a life she could never have imagined, she would have thought they were crazy. But this was where she belonged, not in a St. Louis parlor making polite conversation, not even in a Florence schoolhouse, though she had loved that too. But here, in the wild mountains with the man who had saved her in more ways than one, building a life based on love and trust and the kind of partnership she had not known existed. Thomas came running up, followed by Sarah. "Mama, Papa, did you see? I tracked the rabbit all the way to its burrow." "I saw, sweetheart. You did wonderfully." Catherine pulled both children close, one on each side, and Dalton wrapped his arms around all of them. "Tell us the story again," Sarah demanded, "about how Papa saved Mama from the bad man." "You have heard that story 100 times, Catherine protested, but she was smiling. "But I want to hear it again," Sarah insisted. Dalton caught Catherine's eye and grinned. "All right, one more time. But then you both need to get ready for bed." He launched into the tale, embellishing slightly as he always did, making himself sound less heroic and Catherine more brave. The children listened with rapt attention, even though they knew every word. When he reached the part where he rode off with Catherine while the bandits were distracted, Sarah clapped her hands. "And then you fell in love," she announced. "And then we fell in love," Catherine agreed, meeting Dalton's eyes over their children's heads. "The best thing that ever happened to me." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they all went inside together, to the cabin that Dalton had built with his own hands and that Catherine had made into a home. Thomas helped his father bank the fire, while Sarah helped Catherine set out their breakfast dishes for morning. It was routine, domestic, ordinary. It was everything. Later, after the children were asleep in their rooms and Catherine and Dalton lay together in their bed, she traced the scars on his chest, the marks of his hard life before they met. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not been hunting in those hills that day?" she asked quietly. "Every day, and every day I thank whatever Providence put me there." Dalton caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I was half alive before you, Catherine, just going through the motions. You woke me up." "You saved me first," she reminded him. "We saved each other." He rolled to face her fully, his eyes dark and serious in the dim light from the banked fire. "That is what love is supposed to be, I think. 2 people making each other stronger, better, more fully themselves." "Then we are doing it right." Catherine kissed him softly. "I would not change a single thing about our life, Dalton, not one moment." "Even the part with the bandits?" he teased. "Especially the part with the bandits, because without them I might never have met you, and that would have been the real tragedy." They made love slowly, quietly, mindful of their sleeping children, and afterward, Catherine lay in her husband's arms and listened to the wind in the pines outside. This was her life now, this cabin in the mountains, this powerful, gentle man, these children they were raising together. It was nothing like what she had planned, nothing like what anyone would have predicted for her. It was so much better. The years continued to unfold, bringing more changes and growth. Thomas grew into a tall, serious boy who shared his father's love of the wilderness and his mother's love of learning. Sarah remained spirited and fearless, equally comfortable tracking deer with her father or helping her mother preserve food for winter. In 1888, when Catherine was 34 and thought she was done having children, she found herself pregnant again, and that November gave birth to twin boys, whom they named Daniel and James. The cabin was bursting at the seams, and Dalton spent the next summer building an addition with Thomas, now 14, helping with the construction. Catherine watched them work together, the man and the boy who looked more like him every day, and felt grateful beyond measure for this abundant life. Uncle Thomas passed away in 1890, peacefully in his sleep, and Catherine grieved for the man who had made her new life possible by bringing her to Arizona. But she also celebrated him by continuing to tutor children in the mountains, carrying on the work he had valued. She held classes at the cabin now several days a week, teaching reading and writing and arithmetic to children from the scattered families who lived in the high country. Sarah, 16 and beautiful with her red hair and her mother's determination, announced that she wanted to become a teacher like her mother had been. Catherine felt pride swell in her chest, and she and Dalton discussed sending Sarah to the normal school in Tucson for training. It was hard to imagine their fierce daughter in a city, but they also knew they had raised her to be independent and strong. Thomas, 18 now, and as tall as his father, worked alongside Dalton, trapping and hunting and maintaining the small ranch they had built up over the years. He was quiet and competent, and Catherine saw him looking with interest at the daughter of a family who lived 10 miles south. Young love, she thought with a smile, remembering her own. The twins, now 7, were a matched pair of mischief and energy, keeping everyone on their toes. They were inseparable, inventing their own language and getting into trouble with impressive regularity. But they were also loving and sweet, and Dalton was endlessly patient with their antics. In 1892, 20 years after that fateful day when Bandits had stopped a stagecoach and Dalton had ridden out of the mountains to change Catherine's life forever, they stood together on the porch of their cabin and watched their family gather for a celebration. Thomas was there with his new wife, Mary, the girl from the neighboring ranch. Sarah had come home from Tucson for the summer, full of stories about her training and plans for her future. The twins were chasing each other through the meadow, their laughter echoing off the mountains. 20 years, Catherine said softly, leaning into Dalton's solid warmth. It seems impossible. Best 20 years of my life. Dalton's arm came around her waist, familiar and perfect. You have given me more than I ever dreamed of having, Catherine. This family, this life. We built it together. Catherine looked up at him, seeing silver in his beard now, lines around his eyes from years of squinting at distant horizons. He was 53 to her 43, and she thought he was more handsome now than he had been as a younger man. Age had only added to his strength, his character written in every line of his face. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the part where I grabbed you off a stagecoach in the middle of a robbery? Especially that part. She rose on her toes to kiss him. That was when my real life began. Sarah called to them from the meadow, waving them over to where she had set up a picnic. The whole family gathered together, spreading blankets on the grass, laying out food, telling stories, and laughing. Catherine looked around at the faces she loved most in the world, at the life she and Dalton had created from that single moment of desperate courage, and felt complete. This was what love looked like, she thought. Not the safe, predictable life she had been heading toward in St. Louis, not the polite society matches she had once thought she wanted, but this wild, abundant, sometimes difficult but always real life in the mountains, with a man who had shown her what it meant to truly live. As the sun set over the purple mountains and the family packed up the remains of the picnic, Dalton took Catherine's hand and led her to the bench he had built years ago. They sat together in the fading light, and Catherine rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For riding out of those mountains 20 years ago, for being brave enough to act when you saw someone in danger, for choosing me, for loving me, for building this life with me." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "For everything, Dalton. Thank you for everything." He cupped her face in his hands, those large, strong hands that had held her safe for 2 decades. "Catherine Irving, you are my heart. You and our children, this life we have built. I would ride through 100 robberies to find you again." "Let us hope you do not have to," she said with a laugh. "I'm quite content with the life we have." "So am I, my love. So am I." They sat together as night fell, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast desert sky. And Catherine thought about the strange and wonderful ways life could surprise you. She had come to Arizona looking for independence, for a chance to prove herself as a teacher, for escape from a life that felt too small. She had found all that, and so much more. She had found love in its truest form, partnership and passion, and the kind of deep connection that sustained through good times and hard. She had found purpose in raising her children and teaching others. She had found home in the most unlikely place, a rough cabin in the mountains with a man who had lived alone for years before she stumbled into his life. No, not stumbled, been delivered. By Bandits and fate and Dalton's courage, she had been delivered to exactly where she belonged. Their oldest grandchild was born the following spring, Thomas and Mary's son, and Catherine held the tiny baby in her arms and marveled at how life continued to unfold in surprising ways. She was a grandmother now, still teaching children in her cabin, still deeply in love with her mountain man, still finding joy in every sunrise over the desert she had once thought barren. Dalton built a cradle for the baby, his large hands gentle as he carved patterns into the wood. Catherine watched him work and thought about all the things those hands had built over the years. The cabin that sheltered them, the furniture that filled it, the barn and corral and workshop, the bench where they sat to watch sunsets, the cradle that would hold their grandchildren and, someday, their great-grandchildren. But more than physical things, those hands had built safety and security and love. They had held her on that desperate ride away from danger 21 years ago. They had touched her with tenderness on their wedding night. They had caught each of their children as they were born. They had held her through sorrows and celebrated with her through joys. "What are you thinking?" Dalton asked, looking up from his work. "That I am the luckiest woman alive," Catherine said simply. "Luck had nothing to do with it." Dalton set down his carving tools and came to sit beside her. "We made our own luck, Catherine. We chose each other. We worked hard. We built something real. That is not luck. That is love and commitment and partnership." "You are right." Catherine took his hand, interlacing their fingers. "We made this life together, and it is beautiful." As the years continued to pass, their family grew and thrived. Sarah became a respected teacher in Florence, eventually marrying a doctor and having 3 children of her own. Thomas took over much of the work of the ranch, expanding it slowly while maintaining the wilderness his father loved. The twins grew into young men, different as night and day, but still close, one choosing to go to university in California and the other staying to help Thomas with the ranch. Catherine and Dalton grew older together, silver replacing dark hair, joints stiffening in cold weather, but their love never diminishing. They still sat on their bench at sunset, still shared the bed they had first made love in all those years ago, still found new ways to surprise and delight each other. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin for a celebration. Catherine, now 53, and Dalton, 63, stood surrounded by the life they had created and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Their family had grown to include 5 children, 3 children-in-law, and 8 grandchildren, with more on the way. "Tell us the story, Grandpa," one of the grandchildren begged, and the others took up the cry. "Tell us how you saved Grandma." Dalton looked at Catherine, his dark eyes, now faded to soft brown, still holding the same warmth and love they had from the beginning. "Should I tell it one more time?" "Always," Catherine said. "It is our story, and it is a good one." So Dalton told the tale again, how he had been hunting in the hills above Florence and had seen the stagecoach stopped by bandits, how he had ridden down without thinking, seeing a woman in danger and knowing he had to act, how he had grabbed Catherine and ridden away, her in his arms while gunfire cracked around them, how they had fallen in love in the wilderness, despite all logic and reason, because sometimes the heart knows what the mind cannot understand. The grandchildren listened with wide eyes, and Catherine watched them absorb the story, the romantic adventure of it, but also the deeper truth underneath. That love could come from unexpected places. That courage sometimes meant taking a leap into the unknown. That building a life with someone was the greatest adventure of all. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Catherine and Dalton walked out to their bench one last time. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead, and Catherine felt the weight of all their years together, the good and the bad, the joys and the sorrows, all of it woven together into the rich tapestry of a life well lived. "Do you remember that first night?" Catherine asked. "After you rescued me, when you brought me back to Florence?" "I remember everything," Dalton said. "I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever met. I remember wanting to kiss you, but knowing it was too soon. I remember lying awake that night in the hotel, thinking about you, knowing that my life had just changed forever." "Mine too." Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting into the curve of his body as naturally as breathing. "I knew the moment you touched me. It was like coming home to a place I had never been before." They sat in comfortable silence, and Catherine thought about all the moments that had brought them to this place. The robbery that had thrown them together, the ride through the desert, the conversations by the river, the decision to take a chance on love. The years of hard work and devotion that had turned a connection into a partnership into a family into a legacy. "I would not change a single thing," she said finally. "Neither would I." Dalton kissed the top of her head. "Even the hard parts made us who we are. And who we are together is pretty wonderful." "We did good, didn't we?" Catherine smiled in the darkness. "We built something that will last beyond us." "We did more than good. We did great." Dalton's arm tightened around her. "And we are not done yet. I plan to sit on this bench with you for many more years, watching sunsets and counting our blessings." "I am holding you to that promise," Catherine said. And they did. They had many more years together, watching their family grow and flourish, seeing their children become parents and then grandparents themselves. They grew old together in the cabin they loved, in the mountains that had become their sanctuary, surrounded by the life they had built from a single moment of courage and connection. When Catherine was 68 and Dalton 78, he passed away peacefully in his sleep, her hand in his. She grieved him deeply, missing his presence with an ache that never fully went away. But she also celebrated the extraordinary life they had shared, the love that had sustained them through decades, the family they had created together. She lived another 5 years, teaching children in the mountains until the very end, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And when she died, they buried her next to Dalton on a hill overlooking the valley, with a simple stone that read, "Catherine Irving, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, teacher." She lived bravely. Their family continued to thrive, generation after generation, all of them knowing the story of how it had begun. How a mountain man had ridden out of the hills to rescue a woman from bandits. How he had fallen in love with her in the desert. How they had built a life together against all odds and expectations. It became a family legend, passed down with pride, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances, from being brave enough to reach for the unexpected, from following your heart even when it leads you somewhere you never imagined going. And on summer evenings, when the family gathered at the old cabin, now preserved as a homestead, they would sit on the bench that Dalton had built so long ago and watch the sun set over the purple mountains, remembering the love story that had started it all. The story of bandits and bravery, of courage and connection, of a mountain man and a schoolteacher who had found each other in the wild Arizona desert and had built something beautiful that would last forever.